Hey everyone, this is James from the Red Path here with a new Competitive Insights video for you all. 11th edition is just around the corner, and with it is coming a brand new competitive environment, and I'm as excited as all of you are. Obviously, we have no idea what that is actually going to look like. We're getting some previews, but who knows what is going to happen. I am super excited for that inevitable age of exploration we as a community all get to go through, see what crazy lists stick to the wall as we just experiment. But I always see the new edition as a wonderful time for competitive play because you have new players that entered the previous edition, or maybe ones that have been around here and there that have never really dipped their toes into the competitive environment, suddenly wanting to give it a try. And sometimes you have returning veterans that have not played as much as the edition ran on, coming back with renewed energy. With that in mind, I wanted to take some time to sit down and talk about different methods and principles that I view as necessary for quality competitive practice, and really how you can make the most out of every match you're playing to make sure that you are growing in a positive manner on your competitive journey. World Eaters in particular are a very demanding army to play. They require a very high skill level to have continued success as an event gets larger and larger and more games are played. And even though we see some previews right now that are optimistic and beneficial to a melee-centric army like ours, I don't expect that demand for high skill to change all that much in 11th, or for any edition to come for that matter. With that in mind, this guide is meant to be for players of all skill levels and is meant to introduce principles that will hold true through many editions to come, as well as many different armies to come, whether it be a new codex for us or if you as a player are wanting to experiment with a different faction in this level game of ours. Bit of a cliche opening topic, but one that is very important and very tailored to our community is making sure that you are in the right mindset to have a sort of growth-centric approach to your matches, be it a scheduled practice match or a tournament match. One of the fundamental ways we make sure we're starting off on the right foot, not being overly critical on ourselves, and being in that right mindset is to set appropriate goals for ourselves. And this is actually very easy to get wrong. Your goal competitively for yourself should not be where you want to end up sort of towards the end of your competitive journey. It should be where you want to go immediately next, the most incrementally accomplishable goal that you have. If you're going to tournaments and you're having a good time, but you want to improve and you're consistently going 1-2, 1 win, 2 loss, your next goal should not be, well, I want to win the tournament. Your next goal should be, I want to go 2-1. And you want to have that be repeatable at a consistent rate. And then you can improve that goal. And it doesn't even have to be, well, once I'm 2-1, I need to win. It can be incremental to the point where, well, I need to take into account path to victory. And so the 2-1 needs to be my opening 2 games. I need to make sure I win the opening 2 games so that I'm at least fighting for the top table consistently. Similarly, it's important not to stagnate in this regard. If you are going to 5-game events, a GT, and you're consistently going 3-2, that's great, but you should be challenging yourself to not just always go 3-2. Your next goal should be to go 4-1, right? With a similar understanding of where you are getting that 3-2, what is your path to victory, how are you getting there, as you would in the previous example. You may be thinking, well, why does that matter towards practice? Because surely that is the outcome of the practice. But it's important to understand that because it helps you understand who your peers are at the level you're at, who you need to be talking to, sort of what you need to be striding for, how hard you need to be pushing yourself. And above all, it helps you not be overly critical on yourself, right? If you are the example of someone who's going 1-2, right? And you are consistently trying to say, okay, well, I want to win the next tournament, you are going to be so much more critical on yourself and in much worse of a mood anytime there is a loss because you are looking for a perfect record at that point. But if you are looking to go 2-1, even if you don't achieve it, you likely were just one game off, and you can be more critical and more scrutinizing of your own play. You can make sure that you're having positive reactions to your environment and what's happening at a constant rate, which is not only good for you as a player, but is good communally, which is very important because the next thing to understand is that practice is reciprocal, it's mutual. With the exception of just like deployment drills, you are always playing with someone else. Someone else is always on the other side of the table discussing with you. And it could be a community of competitive players that you are growing with. Understanding where you are skill level wise, understanding where you're going helps you not only sort of figure out who these peers should be, because you should be practicing with people of a similar skill level, if not a slightly higher tier, but it helps them also understand your goals and how best to help you achieve them. That's not to say, like, hey, stop playing like people who aren't quite at your skill level. You should always be having fun with friends that are picking up the game, or friends at your LGS that aren't necessarily in the competitive spirit that you are. Maybe they're more in the narrative thing. Still do those, still have fun with the hobby, right? Still experiment. But if there's a tournament next week that you are trying to very intentionally prepare for, you need to be playing someone who is going to challenge you, who's going to give you scenarios that you have to be creative to problem solve, who knows the ins and outs of their army so that they can give you a realistic representation of the challenges you might face. Winning a practice match, the methodology of which we'll get into a little bit later, yields you really nothing if you won that game because your opponent made 17 mistakes and you were just constantly able to exploit them. In a tournament, great. You need to be able to exploit problems creatively when they come up and really push your opponent. But when you're practicing, the ideal practice match is one where you are at odds and constantly fighting each other in a very even match with adequate information across both players. Suffice to say that if with this reciprocity, with this mutualness, it doesn't mean that once you do start hitting your goals, you have to constantly be looking for new players. If you find a good group and you all are on the same page, you're all communicating, then as you grow, they should be too. And you can raise an entire community with the right mindset and the right practices if you really put your mind to it. Another aspect of this is setting the expectation that you are practicing for competitive play. This is something we're going to expand on a little bit more when we get into the actual methodology of, say, a practice game. But when I sit with a friend and I make it clear that we are practicing for a match, it sets a different tone and expectation. Obviously, like competitive play, we want to win our games, but even when we're playing casually or with a friend, there's always that little goblin in the back of our heads that wants to win the match. It is one on one. We don't necessarily want to lose. Setting the expectation, though, does a few things, saying to your friend, hey, this is a very intentional practice match that we're doing. I'm preparing for this tournament. It prepares them to absorb your information more critically than just what they're doing, so you can have reflective conversations later. It also allows you to prepare them for things like time management. The game may be a bit longer or perhaps shorter than you're expecting. And it kind of releases that obligation of, I want to win. It lets you just say, well, this is a practice game. Let's try some strange things. Let's do some stress testing. Let's see what works. And you can kind of take that little chip on your shoulder, that pride that sometimes gets the better of us, and just kind of set it aside and say, well, this is just for practice. We're just trying stuff out. It really helps you maintain the right mental status and control your mental reactions to the situation so that at all points in time, you and your friend that is helping you are both making sure that you're in this together. You're not getting frustrated. And if there is frustration, it becomes a talking point that you can kind of dial back and see what mistakes were made. Above all, though, you should keep in mind that no matter how your practice goes, two things are true. You can definitely have a bad dice day. Lord knows I have, but even on those games, there is always something to pick out and analyze and say that you did wrong. It's not enough to say, well, if I rolled a 4 up here, I would have won the game. Surely there were other things you could have done over the course of the game that made it such that that 4 up was not necessary to make, perhaps. So always try to look at a keen eye like that. Sure, you can lament over the dice with some beers. Don't let it get the best of you. Try to have a critical eye for what you yourself have done to put yourself in these positions where you're relying a little bit too much on the dice. That being said, quote, "You can commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not weakness, that is life." Jean-Luc Picard, for any Star Trek fans out there. But let's talk about now what an actual practice match looks like and how to get the most out of it. And this is obviously different from just going to a tournament and playing reps at a tournament. You're obviously going to learn new things at a tournament. You're obviously going to get better the more you play. But there's a certain intentionality and method to how you can play a practice match to really get the most out of your experience and communicate with your sparring partner in a way that is very effective and will yield you more in a single match, maybe even an incomplete match, than would several other matches in just a normal environment. One of the things that goes hand in hand with setting the expectation of this is a practice match is being able to ask very critical questions over the course of the game that you're curious about that normally your opponent wouldn't be inclined to tell you. I can make moves at the end of a phase that I'm not sure about, but in a practice match, I can then ask my opponent, hey, was this a good move? What would you have done? Or if I'm hemming and hawing and taking a lot of time making a decision, I can instead just ask my opponent, hey, here's what I'm thinking right now, but what would you do? What is the correct threat assessment here? Yeah, we'll talk a litable bit about a debrief where you can also have discussions like this, but often after a 4-hour game, you've got that clouded mind trying to think back to every scenario that occurred. But this allows you to ask those questions immediately as they come up to make sure you're not missing them. This helps you get in another player's headspace that is often playing a different faction to you. What do they view as proper threat assessment for their army? What do they view as important trading pieces? And what do they view as beneficial positioning compared to what you're posting up? It also allows you the freedom to roll things back that are very critical errors. If one of you makes a horrible blunder that is going to end the game early on turn 2, you have the freedom to look at each other and say, it's a practice game, let's reset things. We know now that that's a mistake that shouldn't occur, and not to overcommit, not get too overzealous in that regard. Let's dial it back and start from scratch, maybe not all the way to the beginning of the game, but just to a state that you know you were. This makes sure that your time's not really wasted because you made a single mistake in the practice. And again, not all of us have the most ample time to get in multiple repetitions of games before tournaments, so we want to make sure we're getting the most out of them. With that in mind, a practice game does not need to be a full game. There are several games that I have with friends that I often say, hey, I really just want to see what the opening 3 turns of this matchup looks like. You know, what is this initial skirmish? Where do we end up positionally with this terrain layout? And if we're having a good time, we'll continue playing, but it allows both of us to say, cool, I have the information I need. We can end here, we can re-rack, we can start discussion. We don't need to continue rolling dice. That helps save a lot of time. And you should practice endgame when possible because it is important to understand how to conserve your resources, understand how you can sort of rally in those final 2 turns, particularly if you're going second, but it's not always the most necessary if you're well practiced. Another critical piece of this practice is having variation in opponents and understanding that some armies are better to practice against regularly than others. I always say kind of love and it be very endearing to your ultramarine friends because as annoying as the blueberries are, they are the most versatile faction to practice against, in my opinion. Even though a lot of their lists are going to look very similar to one another, they don't have a ton of variation there at any given point in time as the meta is. What that army does is incredibly versatile from phase to phase, turn to turn, and offers you a lot of creative challenges that you need to figure out how to overcome, or what it looks like when you fail to overcome them and how that army can clap back. Necrons obviously are something, for instance, right now with Satan are one challenge. They're a bit of a stat check for us and any other army, and their lists are quite strong. Eldari have their trickery, right? But Ultramarines have the consistent versatility in all applications of the game in all phases that allow us to kind of get a full picture of things. As a final sort of poignant example of this, sure, you're going to want to practice against a knight player to see how you do against the stat check. But if I'm going to practice 11 games, I would rather 10 of those games be against an Ultramarine player and 1 against a knight than have that inverted, right? One of those experiences is going to more consistently give me better results and a better understanding of the way the game flows and how I can manipulate things in my favor. As I alluded to earlier, always have a debrief for this stuff. You want to sit back with your sparring partner, have a cool down period after the match, go get a beer if you want to, and affirm to one another you're mutually in this and you're going to sort of analyze each other's play afterwards, maybe analyze each other's lists and what you view as necessary, and continue to improve with one another and bond socially over that. It's important to maintain that relationship, and it's important to do so outside the immediate I'm in front of the pieces where any leftover emotions could still be. You can sit back and sort of analyze the various aspects of the game in a more nuanced, less biased manner after a little bit of period of time and after the game has been played out. We talked about asking questions during the match, but there may be some situations where you didn't feel a question was necessary, as you were very confident in what you were doing, and your opponent may have viewed them as mistakes and now has the opportunity to tell you that. Additionally, this is a period to really affirm the idea of threat assessment for any particular army, as well as priority in terms of trading pieces. You may find out after the fact that a piece you thought was very critical and were very happy to pick up actually was something your opponent wasn't very bothered by losing because they got to keep another critical piece to their machine. Or you may find out that you overcommitted in one regard and that your threat assessment was off in some regards. Having these open conversations will allow you to improve as a player and increase your level of mastery both with your own faction and its capabilities, as well as information from other factions, which is very important to digest. It's important to understand what is the right move, not just what is the scariest thing. I want to touch on more about that word I just used, mastery. It's the ultimate end goal of all this competitive practice, and it is a little bit more about gathering information and constantly having a practice of analysis than it is the methodology we've talked about so far. Understanding threat assessment, understanding trading pieces, and all that I've mentioned is a key part of mastery because it helps you understand the sort of jigsaw puzzle of the game we play and how you and your faction best fits into it. An example I like to use when it comes to threat assessment and the concept of mastery is the idea of a Hecaton land fortress and Votan. I have friends that play Votan, I have peers that play against Votan, and as many of you know, I play Khorne Demonkin, which doesn't have a ton of great responses to a Hecaton land fortress. But I can recognize it is a threat while also recognizing that it's not the easiest threat for me to deal with and it's not the best use of my resources to even attempt to deal with it unless a opportune position opens up. So what do? I often just run past it, recognizing that yes, it is a threat, but there are other credible threats that I can more easily deal with and take care of my opponent's resources in a manner that are more efficient for my own. I can also jail it, abuse its limited range. At the end of the day, these are all important things to note because while we can put as many numbers as we want into stat check, space and the physical aspect of this game often plays a key important part into strategy and how we deal with the problems that are presented to us. Touching back on repetition, it goes without saying that playing the game more is also going to help you improve at the game. But what I think is an important lesson for repetition is this. Playing one list multiple times is going to yield better results for you and more information than playing a different list every time you sit down. You can have a good matchup for a bad list. You can have a bad piloting experience for a good list. One game against one opponent is not enough to understand what is occurring and what mechanisms are and aren't working in a particular setup. This is why sometimes at longer tournaments, I'll actually bring newer lists that I haven't tested before because it'll be nerve wracking, but I'll get high pressure and maximum reps that are going to help me understand what is and isn't working. As some of you may know, I took a blood letterless KDK list to a GT not too long ago and had some success with it. I took it to an environment that gave it ample challenge, maximized the amount of obstacles it was going to face with a variety of factions, and was able to get that practice in a very succinct time, just one weekend. That experience yielded a ton of information to me about the nuances of my detachment in a way that I had not been able to practice with before, and gave me a lot of competitive insight in a manner that normally would have taken a significant amount of scheduling and practice and discussion to do. There is inherent value in considering your tournament's practice and also bringing that growth-centered mindset we talked about earlier, not so much worried about winning the tournament, but gathering as much information as you can from it. You'll often find that people who go to a large amount of GTs will still attend, single day RTTs, but with this in mind, they're testing grounds. They're not so much something they care too much about winning. This brings me to my final point, and that is that if you are the strongest player in the room, find a stronger room. Still play with your people, still compete with everyone around you, and still help them grow as well. But if you're significantly stronger and you feel like you're not being challenged, it's up to you to find a new environment that is going to challenge you. Another LGS, maybe in a different city, that is running tournaments or larger scale events. Finding GTs that you can afford to travel to and going to them, or taking the time to invest and learn TTS, Tabletop Simulator, and trying out some online RTTs there with some more competitive communities. Sure, there is an accolade to being a shark in a small pond, but eventually you need to step out of that zone and continue to challenge yourself. Otherwise, you are going to stagnate, as are the people around you. You not only have an obligation to yourself, but an obligation to your peers to continue to learn and bring back information once you return. And lastly, my final golden rule for maybe not necessarily practice in general, but just being in a good competitive state of mind and physical being: buy some knee braces. Please buy some knee braces. Oh my God. My wife got me some as a gift, and they're the best thing that I've had in my competitive journey, because even after a single day, my knees are starting to kill me. If you have any more questions about good competitive practice, what you should be looking to do, or anything specific you want to talk about in this regard, feel free to comment. I'll shoot back an answer as best I can. But in the meantime, everybody, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill, maim, burn.